Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Lorimer, and we're a bit short-staffed today, so I'm joined today only by Sara. Sara, how are you doing?
No, I'm doing well. I think we exhausted our colleagues in your absence, so they've taken flight.
Clearly, I seem to have driven everyone away the moment I returned, unfortunately. But, nonetheless, thank you for being on. We will do the best that we can. So this may be a slightly shorter episode than usual, seeing that there's only two of us today, but we'll see how far we get. Let's start off with our first story today, and this is a victory for AfriForum in the court system. So AfriForum has been in legal battles with the EFF for quite a while now, on various issues. But this particular case stems from a victory that AfriForum won in 2017, where the court ruled that the EFF was not allowed to incite people to invade what the EFF calls a vacant land or free land or stolen land. The interdict issued by the court prohibits Lorimer and the EFF from inciting people to trespass on private property and to illegally occupy it. The court has now finally dismissed the application of leave to appeal by the EFF, and this means that their legal options appear to be exhausted for overturning this interdict, meaning that the EFF will, at least legally, not be able to encourage people to invade land illegally. The AfriForum said in January 2023, Lorimer and the EFF applied for leave to appeal in this case with the High Court in Pretoria. The application was dismissed. They then took the matter to the Constitutional Court, which dismissed their application in March of 2023. Even after the highest court in South Africa, the Constitutional Court, dismissed their application for leave to appeal, they approached the Supreme Court of Appeal. Today's definitive verdict by the court leaves Lorimer and the EFF with no further options for appeal. AfriForum also said that they believe that incitement to trespass and invade land is in fact a serious crime and should be treated seriously. So, what do you make of this? I guess one of the questions is firstly whether we think the EFF will actually abide by the court ruling. And secondly, the EFF often seems to run into troubles with the court. And I think they've had a little bit more success in recent years than they used to in the past. But still, the courts remain a significant barrier to their kind of free operation. What do you make of this?
Well, I think their success has largely been, and against AfriForum, in the Equality Court, and perhaps the courts that have come after that. So, in other words, it's to do with freedoms of speech and hate speech, etc., etc. It seems to have staved off a lot of the accusations against it. This is important because we know that once people have invaded land and settled on land, getting them off is terribly difficult fairly quick, fairly soon into the invasion. It becomes a real task to have them evicted, even though they are illegal. And the law was changed.
It could take months for you to get the court interdict at a minimum.
And whether it's private land or municipal land or whatever it is, the land is going to be degraded over that time, and it may be land that no one should be on, such as floodplains, which is a big problem in the Western Cape. But the importance of this is that the one thing they can do something about is attempts by the EFF or similar to exhort people to take over land that they don't own, they don't have a right to be on, and if they can interdict it at that point, it's more likely things will fall apart sooner rather than later. And I think it's also an important sort of psychological victory, because the EFF has always got off on being the sort of radical maverick group who are going to act for the unfortunate and the poor, and they're taking advantage of the laws pertaining to eviction. As I say, if they still go ahead, it's still not going to make an eviction easier, but it means that you can aim your some of your litigation at the EFF itself for doing this. It's criminal. So I think it's a good victory psychologically that they've gone. I mean, they went High Court High Court, Constitutional Court, Supreme Court of Appeals. It was, I don't know who advised them, but you usually don't go to the Supreme Court of Appeals last.
Yeah,
but they
that
got
seems a bit silly.
important.
I think
Sorry?
it also suggests. I think it also suggests that this is, how important this is to the EFF that they try to get a win here, because of how important this stuff is to their core messaging. And I think it just highlights for me again how the project that the EFF in particular is engaged in is fundamentally at odds with our constitutional order, and this is why they lose these court cases.
Yeah, well, I think that's true, and I think they sort of their whole image and their whole program is about doing things that are against the constitutional order, pushing, being possibly guilty of hate speech or etc. But this is important, particularly in light of the expropriation without compensation legislation, which threatens legally to deprive people of their ownership of land much more in a processed way, but quickly, relatively quickly. And so we've been fighting that for as long as God knows, since it was first even thought of. So we're going to have to turn our attention very much to how the ANC manages this and the horrible creation of the land court. It's not managed in the past. It's not managed land reform particularly well, and there's no reason other than capacity and money for this. So whether that'll get any better, I don't know. But I think, as I say, the sort of political and psychological blow of setting the EFF back on a strictly criminal constitutional basis, I think is very important, and it's also a warning to the ANC, that it can't kind of, must be a little bit careful in its association with the EFF, because that could lead them into trouble.
Right, and I think the ANC recognizes that problem because, ultimately property is part of our constitution, the right to property, despite the best efforts in recent years of the ANC government and the EFF. And what this kind of highlights is that this is a right that should be taken seriously. If you were inciting people to murder or inciting people to, break into people's houses, that would be so much more kind of open and shut case, I think.
Yeah.
And the fact that the EFF thought that they could win this in the court shows that they thought that society was in such a way as that we don't actually take the right to private property seriously. But the court seems to have proved them wrong in that case.
Yeah, but I think just to say that I think the sort of picking up from what you've said is the fact that it does drive home the importance of ownership of property, and also the sort of temptation to incite people to occupy land is very likely not just going to be land owned by whites. It'll increasingly be land owned by blacks and probably land owned by black politicians. So the interests are growing. Let's put it that way.
Exactly. It's always framed by the EFF as some kind of do-it-yourself racial justice, but it always ends up just being a cynical attempt to kind of stoke political fires and intimidate people and sort of act as a kind of a threat. It's essentially a sort of mafia tactic more than anything else. And I hope now that with this court ruling it will be perhaps a little bit more seen as that in the mainstream.
Very good win.
Just one kind of issue brought up by people in the comments here, and it is something that's kind of always the back of my mind about the EFF. If you look at the declared party funding every quarter, the EFF often doesn't register major donations. They get sometimes 1 or 2. It's usually less than R1 million. Maybe it's R1 million. And yet, the EFF says that it often doesn't get donations, and that it runs entirely off of its parliamentary stipend, which all parties get depending on how big they are. And yet, I've noticed around Johannesburg on every major road, there's those kind of large, expensive posters advertising the EFF's 10th anniversary celebration. And there's the fact that they were able to fight a legal battle through multiple courts across years, and they do this continuously, and they never seem to run out of money.
Yeah.
I think there's a really good opportunity for some investigative journalists, and
I was going to say that,
to go and actually just look at where this money is coming from, because there's so obviously something mismatched here. The parliamentary stipend is not that big. There must be, I think, more going on here.
Look, I mean, no, I was just going to say exactly the same thing. At this point, there is an investigation to be done on who funds the ANC and who funds the EFF. I mean, perhaps confirm our thoughts that the ANC's funded by Russia, and hence, we went across to try and make nuisances of ourselves, and clearly did, because even Putin got annoyed. But I'm actually surprised it hasn't been brought up.
You'd think there'd be an incentive for the ANC to do it, because you'd think it'd be a very good way to kind of control Lorimer. Say, hey, we know where your money's coming from, and anytime you start playing silly buggers with us in coalitions, we could, pull the chain on you. But I think it speaks to the kind of the incentive to protect the party at all costs, and the EFF, I think, is still seen by many people in the ANC as part of the party.
I think it's also the case. I think it's also the case that if the ANC can threaten the EFF can threaten the ANC back regarding who's funding them. So it's literally like watching a B-grade mafia television series with competing cartels of criminals.
Unfortunately, that seems to be far more and more the description of the way things are going in SA. Okay, let's move on to our next topic. And this is kind of a bit of an obvious one in terms of the comments made here, but still quite interesting, I think. So speaking before the Parliamentary Committee on Public Accounts, SCOPA, Eskom's legal head, Mel Govender, said that while she thought that some of the information contained in Andre de Ruyter's book is, quote, risky, she doesn't really think that Eskom should be spending its time right now trying to institute legal proceedings against him. And then, in fact, it would be a much better use of that money to try and go after money that has been stolen rather than try and sue de Ruyter for some kind of defamation. She said, quote, I think some of the information shared is quite risky, but at this point in time, it's still under consideration. My view is that it's not the right place to place our energy and resources or costs into. She also revealed during her deposition at SCOPA that even though she's only been in the job for about 18 months, she's actually going to be leaving Eskom at the end of this month, so at the end of June. She said that it was a highly frustrating environment to work in. It's very difficult to be effective at Eskom, especially coming from the corporate world where decisions are made very quickly. It's a very nice way of putting it. But Sara, what do you make of this? It seems like the brain drain kind of continues at Eskom. They just
I'm glad she gave that advice for exactly the reasons she gave. Going after him is not going to resolve anything. But I actually found her resignation and her explanation for it the most, because although it was fairly politely couched, it was upfront and it was quite bold. And she basically said it's a frustrating environment. Let's scope hear that it's a frustrating environment. It takes ages to get things done. Having worked in the private sector, you're just essentially not geared up for this kind of nonsense. And it's actually a very sort of forthright way of saying Eskom is a dreadful place to work at if you're a normal, ordinary, managerial human being. You can't get anything done.
Exactly, and that's one of those kind of slightly softer things that actually needs to be turned around if you want something like Eskom to work. I think this is true actually for a lot of government departments where, the pay might be good, or you might get good benefits here, or you might be protected from being fired or whatever. But if every day you dread to go into work because of how toxic the environment is, no one with any talent is going to stay there. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And so here we go for the argument for privatizing the supply of electricity. They say that perhaps transmission should remain in the hands of the government, but the problem is that I don't, maybe there are no grounds for this, but I'm a bit suspicious about our sort of lack of load shedding. And I think they're trying to give the impression of, that they are now, doing us a favor and they're getting it right. But I mean, there are a whole lot of factors, such as the excess wind available in winter. The coal burns hotter in winter, and we're using good quality coal because we can't export it out of the country because we can't get it to the coast. So it's it's not exactly, Minister of Electricity's come in and we're going to do, what no one's done before us. But she's essentially summed up the reasons why the private sector should be involved. And maybe the era of Eskom is over because the nature of the demands on electricity supply are different, never mind the corruption and the theft, etc., etc. So it just has to change. It's a bit like any business. Periodically, at points in a business's life, you have to reinvent yourself. And Eskom's an old business, and particularly in the circumstances, a bit of reinvention will do well. But it comes to the issue of this agreement between business and Eskom, business and the government, to assist them to deal with Eskom and trains and crime. And that is, my impression is still that the private sector is not going to have enough control of the processes to actually get things done. And I mean, that's always been the case in the past, and I very much suspect it's going to be the case now. And here's this woman who comes from the private sector saying it's impossible to work in Eskom because it's so slow and inefficient and annoying.
And it also reminds me a little bit of when you're in school, particularly when you're younger and you get put in a group project. And government and business are a little bit like that right now. And government is the kid at school who's very keen to issue orders and tell everyone else what to do, and to take full credit for the assignment, but is not really going to do much to help you. And in fact, if they do anything, it's probably just going to be to make things worse. So I suspect business are once again going to be burned by trying to rescue government from itself, which is it's something that's happened so many times in South Africa at this point. They really need to kind of...
And of course, the business is raising money for this to help the government, and you're thinking, what a cheek, I mean, business can raise money, but that money would be better spent by business directly assisting the citizenry. And I think it'll come to naught, unfortunately.
Indeed. Last point I just want to make is how her comments here about how they really shouldn't be trying to sue Dorata, it kind of reveals just how silly all of this has gotten, which is that the discussion is now about whether Dorata lied or not, or whether Dorata is credible or not, and he's going to be taken to court, and the ANC is going to try and sue him, and Eskom's going to try and sue him, and it's just a complete distraction from the actual changes that need to take place at Eskom. Everything that we've talked about, like ending racial preferential procurement, but just down to the management reforms and going after stolen money. That's all being swept to the side so that we can have a personality clash and a fight about whether Dorata is the hero or the villain.
It's an exercise in sort of chest thumping and posturing. It's so silly.
Yeah, no, it's pathetic, is what it is. But anyway, okay, let's move on to our next story. I don't know how much we have to say about this one, but I just kind of can't quite keep this one out of my mind. I saw it was actually one of the most read stories on Times Live. And anyone who's been following the news will know that former Minister Tina Joemat-Pettersson passed away relatively recently, a few weeks ago. And her family have been pretty quiet about the cause of her death. In fact, they said they didn't know. It came out after a little while. This was a little bit strange, but people die sometimes unexpectedly. However, it seems that while as her autopsy is being, the final results are being awaited, the police have decided on Tuesday that they're going to in fact open an inquest docket into her death, which while it doesn't say that means that she didn't die from natural causes, it could be an indication that she didn't die from natural causes. So the implication here being that maybe there was foul play involved. And we don't know that yet. It's far too early to say, but it's still a little bit ominous because recently she had a public tangle with the currently suspended public protector, Busisizwe Mkhwebane, whose husband accused her of being one of the ANC MPs who had tried to solicit a bribe from Busisizwe. Sara, am I being insane and conspiratorial by thinking that there might be something nasty?
Well, look, as long as the currently suspended public protector is involved, I would say conspiracy theories should abound. I mean, I watched some of her performance when she gave the press conference about this alleged bribe of 3 people, including Joemat-Pettersson, and I mean, it was almost surreal. It was like some of it. I mean, it seemed to suggest that there'd been some foul play, but when she came to present the evidence, it was unclear, and you couldn't hear the tapes. And she was very, very certain, very flamboyant, very well dressed. You know, it was performative, if I can use that word. And you know, the problem is with Sara, she's so bad that you don't, you know, if she has a possible case, you're not going to. Your first thought is not going to go in her favor. Let's put it that way. But you know, we had a presentation by Advocate Paul Hoffman, who was one of the first people to tangle with her, and so he gave a history of his experience with her, and just in particularly the ABSA case that she wanted to have the constitution rewritten over. I mean, I remember that was just absolutely extraordinary. And he thinks that really what she's doing is whatever she's doing is design Stalingrad tactics to get her to her retirement in October, because she then, I think, becomes entitled to, I can't remember because we were talking about a number of people in a similar position, but either obviously a very attractive pension, or if being a 7-year period person, like something like 10 million rand gratuity. So obviously, if she gets found guilty, or even if things don't look like they're going well for her, that gratuity can be withheld. But the more she can slow up the process, I think she's essentially trying to get as little out that could be the basis for withholding the gratuity. I think the problem, however, is that the amount of court cases she's lost, and the fact that she doesn't know her from her elbow, has been apparent for a very long time. And what Paul Hoffman pointed out, which has been my bone of contention, they've now changed the rules. You can be an advocate or attorney who's been admitted with 10 years experience. It never required the experience. So someone like Busisiwe could apply to become an advocate in the High Court of South Africa without having practiced law a day in her life. And by all accounts, she never practiced a day in her life. And
that's quite evident from her record, I think, how many court cases she's lost. Look, you know, even just a couple of years ago, if you had said something like, maybe there's something afoot here in Joemat-Pettersson's death, I would have said, yeah, but probably not. These things are normally more simple than they appear. But with the increasing prevalence, to my eyes, of political assassination in the country, I must say this does concern me very deeply, and I hope more details do come out. I do hope that those details are also made public, because I think it's important that we know whether this was a natural death or not. Yeah. Because if it's not, there's a much bigger problem that we really need to consider closely here. Well,
let's put it this way: there's a much bigger problem that the ANC has to concern itself with. You know, if one of their high ups retired, you know, she chaired a committee after, you know, despite being a crap minister, she chaired a committee, and if she's been whacked, well,
right, and she was in the Ramaphosa faction too. So she's not on the downward, she's not on the losing side here of the internal ANC power struggle. Anyway, we'll keep an eye on that one. See if anything happens.
Her final redeployment.
Yeah. All right. Let's. We've got a few minutes left. Let's very quickly go over this one. I don't know how much there is to say on this one, but it's kind of worth pointing out. And that was the surprising arrest of someone connected to the Rwandan genocide in the Cape recently. A guy called Fulgens Kayashema, who has been charged by the International Criminal Court of participating in the death of 2,000 people at a church in Rwanda during the genocide in 1994. I think he was a police captain or a police officer at the time, and I seem to remember the charge against him was that he either ordered someone to go and fetch petrol or personally did it himself and set this church with thousands of people in it, hiding in it, alight. So he's charged with an absolutely horrific crime. And he's apparently been hiding out in South Africa. He's, I think, 62 now. He was under a false name and identity in the Western Cape, working as a security guard on a wine farm. After a tip-off by international authorities, South African police arrested him and have charged him with 54 charges of everything from fraud, from his identity to contravening immigration laws. He has decided that he is going to plead, I think, not guilty for this, but try and get around the process by applying for asylum. According to his lawyer, my client fears for his life if and when extradited, hence the reason for his asylum application, which has been filed today. Sara, what do you make of this story? I mean, I think it's kind of it's the genocide that actually has had a very long arm in shaping the kind of the modern world. Also in discrediting the UN in particular is the Rwanda genocide, which is one of the most shocking events actually, I think, in Africa's history. And when he says he fears for his life, we've seen that Paul Kagame's regime is, shall we say, not light-handed. So I think that's a very genuine fear. What do you make of all this?
Oh, I mean, I think Kagame would have him assassinated, on the turn, because I think Michaela Wrong wrote some articles recently. She's done a lot of work on that area, and she said, she said that whenever she tried to give a talk in a European capital, invariably it would be cancelled because of fear by the restaurant to be held at, by the owners, or whatever property it was. That they were fearing they would be killed, and his death squads are fairly, it's fairly clear that they do exist. I mean, his former security chief who fell out with him was assassinated in Johannesburg a couple of years ago. So
in Sandton, in a hotel, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I think I can understand the application for asylum. I mean, I'd rather face 54 counts of criminal counts in a South African court and probably imprisonment in a South African jail than take my chances in Rwanda. I mean, Kagame is a brutal character, and I don't hold out much hope for him.
Although I must say that out of, if indeed this guy is responsible for what the International Criminal Court accuses him of, I can't say that I would be particularly cut up if Kagame gets it. In fact, it would be much better than some of the other people that Kagame has tangled with, including the, I don't know if you've ever watched the movie Hotel Rwanda, but the hero of that story actually fell afoul of the Kagame regime and was imprisoned in Rwanda until quite recently. I think he was just released from jail due to requests by I think the Belgians. But horrific stuff, and kind of shocking that this guy was able to just hide in this strange place, and amazing that they found him. Wine farm in the Western Cape. No one would think that that's where someone maybe guilty of genocide would be hiding.
Well, I suppose what's likely to have happened is that he's been there for a long time, and his past will have come out at some point, and some of the people he worked with may not have been happy with him for one or other reason, or they think, you know, the guy like this shouldn't get away with murdering 2,000 people. So it probably was bound to happen. You know, I mean, I think, as I said, I think he's very likely to be assassinated, but in a way, rotting in a jail has a certain appeal, if I can put it that way.
Well, yeah, it would be good for him to go before the International Criminal Court and actually, you know, face the evidence. But anyway, that's all the time we have for today. We actually did a full-length episode. So thank you very much, Sara. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We hope that you found the show interesting, and we will be back next week on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone, and have a good day.